Hello, I'm Brittany Hall Dambro, and I am here in Everett's Library, which is going to be my home base next year. Well, it'll be my home base for 1 hour a day, so I'm still teaching part-time, and part of the time I will be in Everett's Library. I'm here today to talk about my practicum experience and kind of just reflect on everything that I went through. So going into my practicum, I thought that since schools were going to be screen to screen still, there's going to be a lot of flexibility to this experience. And there was a ton of flexibility, but it also made it really difficult to schedule opportunities to interact with the students, the teachers, and fellow librarians in person. Having never worked in a library before, the practicum gave me this behind the scenes look at all the work that goes into maintaining a library. Throughout my practicum experience, I was able to assist in the rollout of Sora, which is a new digital resource that Hazlitt is implementing. This required a lot of personal research on my part. Sora is essentially the student version of Libby, which I was familiar with because I do a lot of reading from my local public library on my iPad and my phone, and I use Libby for that. So I was familiar with a lot of the features that Sora had, but I still needed to do a lot of digging because even though I could use those features, I wasn't sure that I could actually teach somebody how to use it themselves. So did a lot of digging, watched hours of tutorials so that I could be sure that I could answer questions that users might have about the tools and functions. And then I experimented with the program myself, familiarizing myself with the basics of the Sora collection, as well as some of the features that are not available in Libby, but are available to students and teachers. With this knowledge, I created tutorials for both students and teachers, as well as parents, that would help them quickly navigate through Sora versus spending all the time that I did watching each separate tutorial trying to figure it out for myself. Even though I didn't get the opportunity to really introduce it to students personally, I still feel that this was a valuable experience, and I was even able to help some of the other librarians in the school system figure out ways that they could use Sora and answer some of their questions as well. One of the things that I found really frustrating, though, is censorship in Sora. So Sora and Overdrive, which is the parent company, they boast about their features for protecting students from content that might be seen as not age appropriate. And in the library world, we call this censorship. And as I was researching into Sora, I was looking for some of the books on the high school required reading list and discovered that those were deemed inappropriate because they were out of the typical age range for high school students. I mean, The Great Gatsby even, which has been a standard in English literature for 10th and 11th graders for years and years, was blocked. So I understand the sentiment behind this and the desire to protect people, but I have been learning from day one that librarians are morally opposed to any form of censorship, and I believe in open access to information for students. And so I was able to meet with a representative and asked about any ways to turn off some of these filters, and she explained that there was. I unfortunately did not have access to that, so that was something that I referred on to the higher ups downtown, but you can turn off filtering for specific books to make it available, which I feel a little better about, but I would still like to see less restrictions in place, especially for the older readers. I mean, when they can't get their required reading content, it becomes a little frustrating for both teachers and students, and they're less likely to make use of this tool. Another really valuable experience I had was learning to process books. In my collection development course, I learned a lot about the theory of adding books to a collection, and I was grateful to finally get that hands-on experience with this activity. One of the things that has always stuck out to me from the collection development courses that I've taken is that this idea that free books are never really free. Not only do you have to pay for the resources to process them, but it requires a lot of time. So even donations need to be carefully considered before adding them to the collection. Recently, Everett's Library was gifted several large boxes of books And a lot of them were like newer texts that students would be interested in reading, but unfortunately we couldn't add all of the books to the collection. So I had to spend a lot of time reviewing the books, evaluating them. The books that I decided would be added to the collection then needed to be cataloged and processed. And this really showed me how time-consuming this process is. After hours of work over many days, I finally finished adding the approved books to the collection, but I was surprised and frankly overwhelmed at how long it actually took me to complete this project. Along the way, though, I gained lots of valuable skills that will serve me in my day-to-day life as a librarian. Learned how to evaluate books to see if they are something that we want to add to the collection or if they're something that we can pass on. For example, I never really knew that early reader copies should not be added to the shelves because they're not the official publication version. One thing that always kind of seemed overwhelming to me in all of my classes was cataloging, and it still seems kind of overwhelming, but I did get to have a lot of practice doing this through my practicum. When I was going through the book donations, I needed to make records in the library system, which we use Destiny at Everett, for each of the books. So I wasn't actually making my own records, but importing the marked records from other locations. But even still, it took a lot of time. I tried to use some tips and tricks from the librarian to help speed up the process. For example, our library is organized by genreification, so on each of the fiction books I made a little sticky note with the listed genre, which would make it easier for creating spine labels and things like that. However, this was not helpful to me when I came to the nonfiction section because on my sticky note I just wrote a little NF for nonfiction instead of writing the Dewey Decimal number down. This was problematic when I went to make the spine labels and realized I didn't know quickly and easily what number to put on the spine label, so then I had to go back into the catalog, search the collection for the specific test, and record the correct Dewey number on the spine label. In the future, though, I now know that as I'm adding books to the collection and I'm working on cataloging, I will just make a little note to myself about what the appropriate Dewey number is for all the nonfiction books, and this will save me time in the future. The opportunity to collaborate with other librarians and teachers is an experience that I'm very grateful for. As a teacher, I've had a chance to collaborate with other teachers and with a librarian, but this was for the first opportunity that I had to function as a librarian collaborating with other teachers. Over my practicum, I worked closely with the 7th grade English and Social Studies departments in Hazlitt because they were revamping their World War II and the Holocaust unit to include more marginalized voices. What I did was I created an introductory activity that was an escape room that allowed the students to explore this new content, including marginalized voices, and hopefully learn some new things about World War II and the Holocaust to open up different perspectives for them. I spent a lot of time researching what was appropriate to include and how to make an escape room because I had never done that before. So one of the things that I found really helpful to me was my experience in INF 7996, which is a class that I'm in right now. My research project is heavily focused on teacher-librarian collaboration, and so I found that I was able to put a lot of the research that I had done for the previous class into practice in this class. And bonus, I had never created an escape room before, and this was a skill that I learned how to do throughout this time. And it's something that I plan on putting into my own classroom as well. But overall, I think the collaboration experience was great. Anytime that I had questions about information that they wanted me to include, I would reach out to them. They were very quick with their responses back, and I've had positive feedback about the lesson that I created. So I'm hopeful that this is something that they will be able to use over and over again as they work through their Holocaust units each year. The biggest challenge that I faced during my whole practicum experience was really just due to the virtual nature. I think a lot of the issues that I faced in terms of collaboration and communication would not have been there if we had not been in this virtual setting. Unfortunately, I didn't have a lot of opportunity to interact with students face-to-face, and that was very disappointing. Working with the students is one reason that I decided to pursue my master's in library science with a focus in school library, so it was a little disheartening to not be able to interact with them, but I totally understand. This has been a crazy school year. But working with students in both large and small groups is an important element of being a school librarian, so I'm looking forward to getting that opportunity to do that more as I become a librarian in my own school. I also missed out on opportunities to work closely with teachers across all of the departments. If we'd been in person, I would have seen people in the hallway, or I'd been able to pop in their classrooms after school. But due to the nature of this whole crazy school year, that wasn't able to happen. However, I'm very grateful that my supervisor was very involved, and she would be happy to introduce me to any set of teachers that I needed to talk to for different projects that I was working on. Another unfortunate thing is that this was at the end of this crazy school year, right? So teachers are already, in the best of times, kind of burnt out, right? But this year was so mentally and emotionally taxing, and I think that a lot of teachers didn't have the mental space to fit me into their schedule. A lot of the teachers I worked with were great. I would have loved to work with more teachers though. But as a teacher myself, I understand the absolute madness that was this year, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with the teachers that I did. It was just overall a really great experience. If I could do it over again, I would just wish that I could be in person more. In a lot of ways, this practicum experience was similar to my student teaching experience. In both situations, I feel like I entered my internship experience with a lot of theory and a solid background in that theory. But the practicum was really my opportunity to put this into practice, especially because I've never worked in a library before. All of that theory that I had floating around in my head in terms of collection development and censorship and the right to read, the right to information cataloging, it was all just kind of floating around in my head, and I could only imagine how it would be put to use in real life. But like my student teaching experience, the practicum provided me with this opportunity to test what I'd learned and to grow as a professional, to grow as a librarian. And while the past 3 months have been incredibly helpful, I'm also able to recognize that I still have a lot to learn, and most of that is going to be learned through experience. But I do feel that I have this solid foundation of theory and a foundation of skills that I can put to use when I get into my own library full-time. And I'm just very grateful for the experience, and I'm looking forward to the next school year where I get to work as a librarian with students face-to-face for the first time. Yay!